The great hall of the Galactic Nexus station was filled with creatures of every shape and size. Some had scales that shimmered like jewels. Others had tentacles that moved like water. A few floated in the air, their bodies made of something that was not quite solid. They had all come to celebrate. Today marked 300 years since the greatest victory in galactic history. Ambassador Oran of the stood at the center of the hall. His four eyes swept across the crowd as his thin mouth curved into a smile. His silver scales caught the light as he raised his arms for silence. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. 3 centuries ago, we faced a threat unlike any other. A species that spread across the stars like a disease. A species that asked too many questions. A species that refused to know its place. The crowd murmured in agreement. Many of them remembered the stories their grandparents had told, stories of the humans and their endless hunger for knowledge. They called their world Earth, Oran continued. A small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, nothing special. And yet from that small world came a species that threatened everything we had built. They expanded too fast. They bred too quickly. They looked at our ancient laws and asked why instead of simply obeying. A general nodded his massive armored head. His people had led the first attacks against the human colonies. He still kept a piece of human metal on his desk as a trophy. "We did what had to be done," Oran said. "The Conclave of 12 united for the first and only time in our history. We found every human world. We burned them all. We hunted their fleeing ships across the void. And when it was over, when the last human scream had faded into silence, we knew peace." The crowd cheered. Drinks were raised. Tentacles and claws and appendages of every kind reached toward the ceiling in celebration. "Today we remember that victory," Oran finished. "Today we celebrate 300 years of a galaxy free from the human threat. They are gone, they are forgotten, and we are safe." The celebration continued late into the night cycle. No one noticed when a small alert flashed on a communication screen in a forgotten corner of the station. No one saw the message from a scout ship in the outer periphery. And no one heard the pilot's final words before her transmission cut to static. Far from the celebration, in the cold darkness at the edge of known space, Scout Pilot of the was having a very bad day. Her small ship drifted near an energy anomaly that her sensors could not explain. She had been sent to investigate what was probably just a dying star or a natural phenomenon. Instead, she had found something impossible. Wreckage floated before her ship, twisted metal, broken hull plating, and markings that made her blood run cold. The symbols were old, ancient by galactic standards, but every child in conclave space learned to recognize them. Every species taught their young to fear those simple shapes. Human letters, human numbers, a human ship. His hands trembled as she checked her readings again. The wreckage was not 300 years old. It was fresh. The metal still held traces of warmth. The damage was recent. Someone had destroyed this ship within the last few days. "This is Scout Pilot," she said into her communicator, her voice shaking. "Transmitting coordinates of anomaly I have found. I have found human wreckage. Recent human wreckage. I repeat, this is not ancient debris. This is." Her sensors screamed a warning. Something was approaching. Something massive. Something that her computer could not identify because it had never seen anything like it before. Looked up through her viewport and felt her heart stop. A ship hung in space before her. It was black as the void itself, shaped like no vessel she had ever seen. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, and it was pointing something at her ship, something that glowed with a light that hurt her eyes to look at. "Impossible," she whispered. The light grew brighter. Her transmission continued to send. And then Scout Pilot of the became the first member of the conclave to learn, in 300 years, that the humans were not as dead as everyone believed. Her transmission reached the Nexus station 3 hours later. By then, the celebration had ended, and most of the ambassadors had returned to their quarters. The message was received by a junior communications officer who listened to it twice before he understood what he was hearing. Then he listened to it a third time because he could not believe it. Then he ran faster than he had ever run in his life. But none of this mattered to the humans. Deep in the space between spiral arms, where no sane species would ever travel, a structure drifted in the endless dark. It had once been an asteroid. Now it was something else. Something that had been hollowed out and rebuilt over 3 centuries of patient work. Inside its shell of rock and metal, lights burned. Forges roared. Children played in corridors carved from stone. Old men and women shared stories of a world they had never seen but would never forget. On the command deck at the heart of this impossible place, an old woman stood before a holographic map. The map showed conclave space in perfect detail. Every planet, every station, every fleet. She had spent 50 years building this map, gathering information bit by bit from captured transmissions and stolen data. Admiral was 147 years old. She had been born on Earth, in a city called Kyoto, 3 years before the purging. She had been a child when the sky turned to fire. She had been a teenager when her parents put her on a ship and told her to run. She had been a young woman when she learned that everyone she had ever loved was dead. Now she was old. Her hair was white. Her skin was lined with age. But her eyes were sharp, and her memory was perfect, and her heart still burned with a flame that 300 years had not dimmed. "Admiral," a young officer said from behind her, "the scout did not return. We believe she was detected." Nodded slowly. She had expected this. She had planned for it. "How long until we are ready?" she asked. "The fleet reports full readiness. 1,700 vessels, 4 million personnel. We can move on your order." Looked at the map for a long moment. She found the Sol system. She found the empty space where Earth had once been. She remembered the smell of cherry blossoms in spring. She remembered her mother's laugh. She remembered everything. 300 years, she said softly. Long enough to mourn, long enough to build, long enough to become something they never expected. She turned to face her officer. "Signal the fleet, we're going home." In the darkness between galaxies, 1,700 ships began to wake. Their engines hummed with power that the Conclave had never imagined. Their weapons charged with energy that could crack planets. Their crews stood ready, humans every one, descendants of the survivors who had fled into the void rather than die. They had been silent for 300 years. They had hidden, they had grown, they had changed. Now they were coming back, and the galaxy would learn that humanity was very, very hard to kill. Commander Elias Vance had never seen a planet. He had been born in space, on a ship called the Remembrance, and he had lived his entire 32 years moving between vessels and stations carved from asteroids. The idea of standing on solid ground under an open sky was strange to him, almost frightening. But he knew about Earth. Every human child learned about Earth before they learned anything else. They learned about blue oceans and green forests. They learned about cities that touched the clouds and deserts that stretched forever. They learned about animals and birds and fish and flowers. And they learned about the day when all of it burned. Elias stood on the observation deck of the Remembrance and watched the fleet prepare. Through the thick glass, he could see ships of every size moving into formation. Destroyers and cruisers and carriers and vessels so large they had no proper name. All of them human. All of them built in secret over 3 centuries. All of them ready for war. Impressive, isn't it? Elias turned to find his grandmother standing behind him. Admiral looked small and fragile, but he knew better than anyone that appearances meant nothing. This woman had kept humanity alive through 300 years of hiding. This woman had turned refugees into warriors and victims into survivors. "I still don't understand how we did it," Elias admitted. 12 ships escaped the purging. 12 small ships with barely enough supplies to last a decade. And now, he gestured at the fleet. Smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was pride in it too. Humans are stubborn, she said. When we fled into the void, everyone thought we would die. The conclave thought we would die. We thought we would die, but we didn't. She walked to stand beside him at the window. Together they watched a massive dreadnought drift past, its hull covered in writing. Elias knew that writing. Every human knew it. The names of every city on Earth that had been destroyed. Tokyo, New York, London, Cairo, Mumbai, Beijing. Thousands of names carved into metal so they would never be forgotten. The first 50 years were the hardest, continued. No planets to land on. No aliens to trade with, just 12 ships and the endless dark. We had to learn to survive on nothing. We recycled everything. We built new ships from asteroid metal. We grew food in vats and made water from comets. Every day was a fight just to stay alive. But we survived, Elias said. We did more than survive. Eyes grew distant as she remembered. The conclave always thought humans were dangerous because we expanded too fast, but that wasn't why we scared them. We scared them because we never stopped asking questions. We never stopped learning. We never stopped improving. Elias nodded. He had grown up surrounded by technology that the conclave had never imagined. Ships that could fold space itself to travel faster than light. Weapons that could tear apart the fabric of reality. Medical technology that had extended human to nearly 2 centuries. All of it developed in isolation, without any alien help, by descendants of refugees who refused to give up. In the beginning, we were behind, said. Conclave technology was centuries ahead of ours when they attacked, but we had something they didn't. We had motivation. Every scientist, every engineer, every researcher worked not for money or fame but for survival, and for revenge. She turned to face her grandson directly. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, and Elias saw something burning in them that he had seen all his life, a flame that had never gone out. The conclave thinks they destroyed us, she said. They think they won. They've spent 3 centuries congratulating themselves on their great victory, but they made a mistake. They didn't kill all of us, and they didn't understand what humans do when you try to break us. We get stronger, Elias said. We get stronger. We get smarter. We get patient. Smiled again, and this time there was nothing tired about it. 300 years, Elias. We've waited 300 years. We've built a fleet that could conquer half the galaxy. We've developed weapons that make conclave technology look like children's toys. We've trained 4 million soldiers who have never known anything but preparation for this moment. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He had known this day would come. Every human had known it. But hearing his grandmother say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Are we really going back? He asked. That's not for me to decide alone. Turned back to the window. This is too important. Every human needs to choose. That's why I've called the vote. The vote? Elias had heard about it but hadn't quite believed it was happening. Every human in the fleet, from the oldest admiral to the youngest child, would be asked the same question. Do we go back? Do we reveal ourselves to the galaxy that tried to murder us? Do we finally face the conclave that burned our world? The voting took 3 days. Every ship, every station, every habitat in the remnant fleet collected the answers of its people. And when the count was finished, Admiral stood before a camera and addressed her people one last time before the journey began. The votes have been counted, she said. Her face was broadcast to every screen in the fleet. 4 million humans stopped what they were doing to watch. The question was simple. Do we return to known space? Do we show the conclave that we still exist? Do we demand answers for what was done to our ancestors? She paused. In the silence, Elias felt his heart pounding. The vote was unanimous, continued. Every single human has voted yes. Not one person chose to stay hidden. Not one person chose to remain in the dark. After 300 years, we are ready to go home. A sound rose through the fleet. It started small, in individual ships and stations, but it grew until it became a roar. 4 million voices raised together, cheering, crying. Some were shouting words of revenge. Others were simply releasing emotions that had been building for generations. 3 centuries of grief and anger and hope all exploded at once. Elias found himself shouting too. He didn't know what he was saying. It didn't matter. He was part of something larger than himself, part of a story that had begun long before his birth and would continue long after his death. Admiral waited until the cheering faded. Then she spoke one final time. Plot course for the Galactic Rim. All ships prepare for fold space jump. We have a reunion to attend. The fleet began to move. 1,700 ships formed into a massive formation. The smallest vessels were destroyers that could outgun anything the Conclave had ever built. The largest was the Judgment, a dreadnought 12 kilometers long that served as the fleet's flagship. Its hull was covered with the names of Earth's dead cities, and its weapons could crack moons. One by one, the ships activated their fold drives. Space twisted around them. Light bent in ways that hurt the eyes to watch. And then, in a flash that lit up the void for 1,000,000 kilometers, the remnant fleet vanished. 300 years after they had fled into the darkness, the humans were coming back. The Conclave had no idea what was about to happen. They thought they were safe. They thought the threat was gone. They had grown comfortable in their victory. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. Station Commander had served on the Galactic Rim for 40 years. His posting at Fortress Station 9 was supposed to be boring. The Rim fortresses had been built 3 centuries ago to watch for a threat that no longer existed. They were monuments to paranoia, staffed by soldiers who had nothing to do but run drills and stare at empty space. Had processed exactly 3 alerts in his entire career. All 3 had been malfunctions. He expected today to be the same when his sensor officer's voice came through the communicator, tight with confusion. Commander, we're detecting an energy signature, unknown origin. Sighed and walked to the sensor station. Probably another malfunction, or maybe a comet, or perhaps some debris from an old battle. There were many explanations for strange readings, and none of them were interesting. Then he looked at the screen, and his 4 hearts stopped beating. That's impossible, he whispered. The screen showed contacts, many contacts, more contacts than he had ever seen in one place. The numbers kept climbing as the sensors struggled to count them all. 500, 800, 1,000, 1,200. The number kept rising until it stopped at 1,700. 1,700 ships had just appeared at the edge of Conclave space. Configuration unknown, the sensor officer said. His voice was shaking. I have never seen designs like these. They don't match any species in our database. Commander, these ships, they just appeared. No approach detected. No warning. They folded space in a way our sensors couldn't track. Felt ice spreading through his veins. He had read the histories. He knew what species had been rumored to be working on fold technology 3 centuries ago. He knew which species had been destroyed before they could finish their research. Signal the Nexus, he ordered. Signal everyone we need. The communication screen flickered. Static filled the display for a moment. Then the static cleared and a face appeared. A human face. Old and lined with age but sharp with intelligence. Female, with white hair pulled back from her features and eyes that burned with barely controlled fire. This is Fleet Admiral of the Human Remnant, the woman said. Her voice was calm and steady, speaking perfect galactic standard. 300 years ago you came for us. You burned our world, murdered our children, declared us extinct. Could not move, could not speak, could not think. He was watching a ghost with a fleet of 1,700 warships behind her. You were wrong, Admiral continued. We survived, we grew, we improved, and now we have returned. Her eyes seemed to look directly at through the screen. We are not here for revenge, not yet. We are here for answers. The Conclave of 12 will assemble. You will explain why you tried to murder our species, and then we will decide what comes next." The transmission ended. The screen returned to showing the impossible fleet hanging in space like a wall of judgment. Finally found his voice. "All stations, battle positions, power weapons, prepare to engage." It was the only thing he could do. His training demanded it. His duty required it. 12 fortress stations against 1,700 enemy ships. The math was suicide, but he had no other choice. The fortress stations opened fire. Thousands of weapons unleashed their fury at the human fleet. Missiles screamed across the void. Energy beams carved bright lines through the darkness. Kinetic rounds accelerated to fractions of light speed. It was the greatest display of firepower had ever witnessed. None of it mattered. The human ships did not even slow down. They did not maneuver. They did not retreat. They simply continued forward as if the attack was nothing more than a light rain. Watched in horror as his missiles were erased by defensive systems he could not understand. Energy beams bent around the human hulls as if deflected by invisible shields. Kinetic rounds simply vanished before reaching their targets. "Impossible," the weapons officer breathed. "Our attacks aren't doing anything. It's like they're not even there." One of the human ships broke formation. It was small compared to the others, probably a destroyer by their standards. It moved with a grace that seemed wrong for something made of metal, and it was pointing something at Fortress Station 7. A single beam of light shot from the destroyer. Watched Fortress Station 7 fold in on itself. 3 million tons of armor and weapons and crew compressed into a space smaller than his fist. Then it vanished completely, leaving nothing behind. No debris, no wreckage, no bodies, just empty space where a fortress had been. One single shot. "All stations cease fire," ordered. His voice was hollow. "Signal surrender, signal." He stopped. What could he possibly signal? What words existed for this moment? The human fleet continued forward. They passed the fortress stations without destroying them. They passed station close enough that he could see the details of their hulls through his viewport. He saw weapons he could not identify, technology he could not understand, and on the side of the largest ship he saw writing. Names carved into the metal. Thousands and thousands of names. He realized they were cities, human cities, the places the Conclave had destroyed 300 years ago. The fleet did not stop at the rim. It continued into Conclave space, heading directly for the Nexus station, where the ambassadors were probably just learning what had happened. Emergency signals were already flooding every communication channel. Panic was spreading faster than light as species that had felt safe for 3 centuries suddenly realized they had never been safe at all. On the bridge of the Judgment, Admiral watched the Conclave stations shrink behind her fleet. Beside her, Commander Elias Vance stood in silence, processing what he had just witnessed. "One shot," he finally said. "We destroyed a fortress station with one shot." "We could have destroyed all of them," replied. "We could destroy everything in our path. The Conclave has no weapon that can stop us, no defense that can slow us. We have spent 300 years preparing for this moment, and they have spent 300 years celebrating their victory over us. Then why didn't we destroy them all?" Turned to face her grandson. Her ancient eyes held something complicated. Sadness and anger and determination all mixed together. "Because destroying things is easy," she said. "Anyone can destroy. The Conclave taught us that. They destroyed our world in a single day. They thought that would be the end of us." She shook her head slowly. "But we are not going to be like them. We are going to do something much harder. We are going to make them understand. We are going to make them explain. And then we are going to show the galaxy what humanity really is." The fleet continued forward. Behind them, 12 fortress stations drifted in space, untouched but terrified. The crews watched the human ships disappear into the distance and knew that their world had just changed forever. Across Conclave space, species that had not cooperated in centuries suddenly remembered why they had united in the first place. Emergency meetings were called. Ancient alliances were invoked. Military forces that had grown lazy from centuries of peace scrambled to organize. But everyone who looked at the footage from the rim knew the truth. The enemy they had united against 300 years ago was not the same enemy returning today. The humans had changed. They had evolved. They had become something new. And whatever was coming next, the Conclave was not ready for it. The Galactic Nexus had never seen so many ambassadors. Representatives from all 12 Conclave species had arrived within days of the human fleet's appearance. Ships filled every dock. Soldiers filled every corridor. Fear filled every heart. Ambassador Aran of the called the emergency session to order. His voice was not as confident as it had been at the celebration just weeks ago. His scales had lost some of their shine. He looked older somehow, as if the weight of history had suddenly crashed down upon his shoulders. "The situation is unprecedented," he said to the assembled delegates. "The humans have returned. Their fleet surrounds this station as we speak. They have made demands. They want answers for what happened 300 years ago." "Then we give them war," growled General of the. His massive armored form dominated one corner of the chamber. "We destroyed them once. We will destroy them again." "With what?" The voice came from a floating sphere of light. The Etherian representative rarely spoke, but when they did, others listened. "You have seen the footage from the rim. One of their destroyers eliminated a fortress station with a single shot. Their technology has advanced beyond anything we possess." "Then we negotiate." The ambassador spread his hands. "We offer them territory, resources, whatever they want. We buy time until we can develop countermeasures." The chamber erupted in argument. Species that had cooperated for 3 centuries began blaming each other. The accused thee of being cowards. The accused thee of being fools. The smaller species tried to stay out of the conflict while quietly calculating which side was more likely to win. Only the remained silent. Elder sat in the darkest corner of the chamber, his ancient body wrapped in robes that hid most of his features. They were the oldest species in the conclave. They had been exploring the stars when the other species were still learning to use fire. They remembered things that others had forgotten. They remembered the truth. The doors to the chamber opened without warning. Every head turned, every argument stopped, and 2 humans walked into the room. Admiral moved slowly, her age evident in every step, but her presence filled the chamber like a thunderstorm. Beside her walked Commander Elias Vance, young and strong and watching everything with sharp eyes. "We were not invited to sit," said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Humanity was removed from conclave records 300 years ago. We do not exist according to your laws." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "So I will stand." Oran found his voice first. "Admiral, the conclave welcomes you. We are prepared to discuss terms for peaceful." "I did not come here for peace," interrupted. "I came here for truth. 300 years ago, the conclave of 12 united to destroy my species. You burned Earth. You hunted our colony ships. You killed 8 billion people and declared victory." Her eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of each ambassador. "I want to know why." "You were a threat," General N said. "Your species expanded too quickly. Your population grew too fast. If we had not acted, you would have eventually." "That is a lie." His voice was quiet, but it silenced the general instantly. She reached into her robes and produced a small device. A hologram sprang to life above it, displaying documents and recordings. "We have spent 300 years gathering information, stolen transmissions, captured records, data pulled from conclave networks. We know the truth." The hologram showed images of Earth before the attack, peaceful cities, humans going about their lives, ships engaged in trade, not war, research stations studying the stars. "Humanity was not preparing for conquest," continued. "We were exploring, learning, asking questions. Specifically, we were asking questions about conclave history, about the species that came before, about the forbidden archives that your governments keep hidden from your own people. A murmur ran through the chamber. Several ambassadors exchanged nervous glances. Our researchers were close to discovering something, said. Something that the conclave desperately wanted to keep secret, so you destroyed us. Not because we were a military threat, not because we were expanding too fast, but because we asked questions that you were afraid to answer. This is speculation, Oran said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Turned to face the elder in his dark corner. Elder, your species has lived longer than any other in this room. You remember the days before the conclave. You remember the truth. Will you share it with them? Or will you continue the lie that cost 8 billion lives? Every eye turned to the elder sat motionless for a long moment. Then slowly he rose from his seat. His ancient bones creaked. His robes fell around him like shadows. When he spoke, his voice was like dry leaves rustling in wind. She is correct. The chamber exploded in shock. Ambassadors shouted questions. Generals demanded explanations, but continued speaking, and gradually they fell silent to listen. The conclave is not the first galactic civilization, he said. There were others before us, many others. They rose and fell over millions of years. The last one, the greatest one, seeded life across the galaxy before they vanished. They created many species, including most of the ones in this room. The silence was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. We share common ancestry, continued. The Etherians. Even my own people. We were created by the same ancient race. We are family in a sense. But this knowledge was suppressed long ago because it would destroy the hierarchy that the conclave was built upon. If all species are equal in origin, then no species can claim superiority over others. The humans discovered this, said. Our researchers found evidence in the forbidden archives. We were weeks away from publishing our findings when the attack came. Elias stepped forward for the first time. His young face was tight with controlled anger. You murdered 8 billion people to protect a lie. You erased our because we asked questions, not because we were dangerous, because we were curious. This cannot be true, Ambassador Oran said, but his voice was weak. It is true. Elder's words fell like stones. I was there when the decision was made. I argued against it. I was overruled. The conclave chose to commit genocide rather than face the consequences of the truth. 3 delegations stood and walked out of the chamber immediately. The Etherians. Though they did not say anything. They did not need to. Their departure said everything. The remaining ambassadors began to argue among themselves. Accusations flew. Ancient alliances crumbled in moments. The blamed the for keeping secrets. The blamed the for leading the attack. Everyone blamed everyone, and no one took responsibility. Through it all, Admiral stood still and silent, watching the civilization that had tried to murder her species tear itself apart from within. Finally, Oran turned to her in desperation. What do you want? Name your terms, anything. The conclave will agree to anything to avoid war. Looked at him for a long moment, then she spoke. We came here for answers. Now we have them. Tomorrow we will deliver our judgment. She turned and walked toward the door, Elias at her side. At the threshold she paused and looked back. I suggest you use the night to consider what you have done, and what you would do to make it right. Then she was gone, leaving a chamber full of broken leaders behind her. The night before the judgment, Elias found his grandmother standing alone in an observation room. Through the massive windows, the remnant fleet hung in space like a constellation of vengeance. 1,700 ships, weapons capable of destroying worlds. 3 centuries of preparation aimed at the heart of conclave space. Elias had expected to find her planning the final strike. Instead, she was simply standing in the dark, watching the stars. I thought you would be working on your address, he said. did not turn around. The address is finished. I wrote it 50 years ago. I have rewritten it 100 times since then. I know exactly what I am going to say. And what is that? Now she turned. In the dim light, she looked every one of her 147 years, but her eyes were still sharp, still burning with that fire that had kept humanity alive through the dark centuries. "What would you do," she asked, "if you were standing in my place tomorrow, if you had the power to destroy everything the Conclave has built? What would you choose?" Elias had been asking himself this question since they first jumped into Conclave space. He had imagined fire and destruction. He had imagined revenge for the world he had never seen but mourned every day. He had imagined making them pay for what they had done. But standing here, looking at his grandmother's tired face, he found that his imagination had changed. "I don't know," he admitted. "A week ago I would have said we should burn it all, make them suffer like we suffered, but now," he shook his head, "revenge would feel good for a moment, and then what? We become the monsters they always feared we would be." Smiled. It was the first real smile Elias had seen on her face since the fleet departed. "Good answer," she said. "If you had known exactly what to do, I would have worried about you. Certainty is comfortable, but wisdom is not." She turned back to the window. The fleet sparkled in the darkness, waiting for orders. "I was 5 years old when the sky turned to fire," she said softly. "I remember the heat on my face. I remember my mother screaming. I remember being carried through chaos and thrown onto a ship that barely escaped. For 300 years I have carried that memory. I have built my entire life around it. Everything I have done, everything we have built has been leading to this moment. And now that the moment is here, now I have to decide what kind of species we will become." Pressed her hand against the cold glass. "Destroying the Conclave would be easy. Our weapons could crack their worlds. Our fleet could hunt their ships. We could do to them exactly what they did to us, and no one in the galaxy would be able to stop us. But that would make us exactly what they feared we would become. It would prove that they were right to attack us. It would justify everything they did." She shook her head slowly. "I did not spend 300 years keeping humanity alive just to turn us into the villains of someone else's story." Elias stood beside her at the window. Together, they looked out at the fleet that represented everything humanity had built in exile. "So what will you do?" he asked. Was quiet for a long moment, then she spoke. "Something much harder than destruction, something that will test us more than any battle ever could." She turned to face him directly. "I am going to ask humanity to forgive." The next morning, the conclave chamber was silent as Admiral delivered her judgment. "We could destroy you," she said. Her voice carried to every corner of the room, broadcast to every ship in the fleet, transmitted to every world in conclave space. "Our weapons could shatter your planets. Our fleet could hunt your people to extinction. We could give you exactly what you gave us 300 years ago." The ambassadors waited. Some were terrified, some were resigned. All of them expected fire. "Instead," continued, "we offer something else. The Conclave of 12 is dissolved. It was built on lies and maintained by fear. It must end. In its place, we will build something new. A true alliance where every species has an equal voice, where the forbidden archives are opened, where truth is valued more than hierarchy." Shock rippled through the chamber. This was not what anyone had expected. Every species that was conquered or suppressed by the conclave will be given the chance to join. Every secret that was hidden will be revealed. Every lie that was told will be corrected. The galaxy will learn the truth about its past, and together we will build a better future. Ambassador Oran found his voice. "And humanity, will you lead this new alliance?" Shook her head. "No, humanity will participate as equals, nothing more. We will not rule, we will not dominate, we will not claim any special position or power." "Why?" The question came from General N, his voice filled with genuine confusion. "You have the power to take everything. Why would you choose not to use it? Looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried to every ear. Because power without restraint is what created you. It is what allowed a civilization to commit genocide and then celebrate it. We have spent 300 years learning what happens when power is used without wisdom. We will not make the same mistake. She paused. Her ancient eyes swept across the room. The conclave tried to destroy us because they feared what we might become. They were afraid that we would grow too powerful, too fast, too dangerous. They were afraid that we would conquer the galaxy. She smiled, and there was something almost gentle in it. They were wrong about our intentions, but they were right to be afraid of us. We are dangerous. We are stubborn and creative and relentless. When someone tries to break us, we do not stay broken. But that does not mean we have to use our strength for destruction. We can use it for building instead. We can use it to create something better than what came before. That is our choice. That is what makes us human. She turned to face the window, looking out at her fleet. You have one day to decide. Accept our terms and we will build a new galaxy together. Refuse, and we will do what we must to ensure that no species ever has to suffer what we suffered. She turned back. Choose well. 5 years later, the first class of the new Galactic Academy graduated. The ceremony was held on a station built at the edge of the Sol system, overlooking Earth. The planet below was still healing. The scars of the purging were visible from orbit, but green was spreading across the continents. Oceans were clearing. Life was returning. Elias Vance, now an ambassador of the human remnant, stood at the back of the graduation hall and watched species that had once tried to murder each other sit side by side. Students chatted with cadets. Etherian scholars debated with historians. Human children played with the young of a dozen different species. Through a window, he could see his grandmother in the gardens below, had finally retired after 152 years of service. She spent her days now in the soil, planting trees and flowers imported from Earth's surface. The fire in her eyes had dimmed at last, replaced by something like peace. A young approached Elias nervously. She was barely out of childhood, her scales still bright with youth. Ambassador Vance, she said, I have been studying the old archives, the records from before the purging. I wanted to ask. She hesitated. Were humans really as dangerous as they said? Elias watched his grandmother pat soil around a small sapling. Cherry blossoms, he knew, her favorite flower from old Kyoto. We were curious, he said. We still are. We ask questions. We refuse to be silent. We remember everything, both the good and the terrible. And when someone tries to break us, we do not stay broken. He smiled at the young. So yes, we are exactly as dangerous as they said, just not in the way they meant. The student considered this for a moment. Her scales shifted colors as she thought. May I ask more questions? She said finally. Elias laughed. It was a warm sound full of hope for the future. That is the only thing we have ever wanted anyone to do. Below in the garden, Admiral straightened up from her planting and looked at the sky. Earth hung above her, wounded but alive. Her fleet orbited peacefully alongside ships from a dozen species, and somewhere in the distance she could hear children laughing. 300 years ago, she had been a frightened child watching her world burn. Today, she was an old woman watching a new world begin. It was, she decided, a good trade. The cherry tree would bloom in spring, and humanity would be there to see it.